All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the third webinar of the series. You can find our previous webinars on our YouTube channel and also drop the link in the chat in a few. We hope to continue these discussions to bring our community together and talk about our needs, our challenges, and hopefully we can collectively address them. And speaking of challenges, foundational data to build, run, validate models is a pretty significant one. So today we have Professor Ruth Wilcox and Dr. Alison Jones with us from the Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering at the University of Leeds. They will be talking to us about their efforts to build a cadaveric knee database and how that can potentially be reused. So without further ado, I will pass on the controls to them and looking forward to a great discussion.
Great, thank you very much for the introduction and thank you for the invitation to host this webinar. We're really excited about it. So my name is Ruth Wilcox. I'm Professor of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Leeds, and I'm the director of our research group, which is called the Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering. And I'm joined this evening by my colleague, Alison Jones. She is Associate Professor of Computational Biomedical Engineering, also at the University of Leeds. So I'm going to start off by introducing ourselves and our work a little bit, and then Al is going to go into some more details about the data sets and the data sharing. We want this to be an interactive session, so we're going to be posing some questions and there'll be opportunities for discussion as we go through. You may already have seen a little QR code appear in the chat. We'll be putting that up on the screen in a few minutes' time, which will enable you to access some of the polls that we're going to run. So if you don't have your phone to hand or some way of capturing that QR code, perhaps go grab that now. Al, could you progress to the next slide, please, for me? Thank you very much. So, as I said, we're from the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. Leeds is sort of in the north of England, kind of smack bang in the middle of the United Kingdom. The university is one of in the top tier of UK universities called the Russell Group. It's about 38,000 students here and about 4,000 academic staff. We have a large engineering faculty at the university, and both myself and Al are based in the School of Mechanical Engineering within that faculty in the Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering. There's a picture here on the left of the Great Hall at the university and on the right of our research building where we both work. As you can see, lovely blue skies in the background, which is actually also true outside right now in Leeds. That's not always the case, but we are a little bit sunnier than some other parts of the UK. So when you come over to visit, yeah, well, hopefully we can guarantee you some pictures like that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So there's a long history at Leeds of medical engineering, dating really right back to the 1960s, when some of the earliest hip replacements, which were developed by Sir John Charnley at Risington Hospital, they were manufactured in Leeds by a company called Charles Thackeray's that went on to become part of DePuy, which is now Johnson & Johnson MedTech. And they still have a major presence as a major company in the city. But the issues with wear in these early joint replacements led to collaborations with the mechanical engineers at the university, initially through Duncan Dowson and later through John Fisher, who developed methods of evaluating the tribology of these joint replacements, including through the types of wear simulators that we can see there on the right-hand side. So mechanical simulators for testing out these devices and simulating their wear. And this area of research has continued and grown over the decades. And in fact, we have the largest academic facility in the world for testing joint replacement devices. Go to the next slide. So nowadays, that type of research forms part of the activity within our Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering. And our core aims really are both to improve existing surgical interventions, but also to support the development of new treatments and therapies. And in both cases, we focus on procedures primarily related to the musculoskeletal and cardiovascular systems. So where there's a where mechanical loading is important and where the devices are going to have to last for many decades in the body. So really where the mechanical engineering aspects of the research are important. On the left-hand side, we work on kind of existing devices. We work more with industry. And on the right-hand side, where we're looking at newer interventions, we work with academic colleagues really both at Leeds and elsewhere in developing a range of new treatments, including tissue engineered and regenerative therapies. But underpinning both the existing interventions and the new treatments, our research really is around developing methods to simulate and evaluate the performance of these devices and treatments, both in laboratory in vitro models and also in computational in silico models. If you go to the next slide, please, Al. So I just put onto here some of our major funding over the last 5 years, which includes a number of grants from the UK government through the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, EPSRC. And they also support the translation of our work through an accelerator programme that we hold jointly with the University of Sheffield. And then we also work closely with our clinical colleagues here in Leeds through a biomedical research centre, which is funded through our National Institute for Health and Care Research. Across all these grants, we generate data, and it's often a requirement of our funders to release at least the data that's associated with our publications as open access. And so that brings on to me, well, brings for me to pass over to Al, who's going to explain our first poll.
Yes, so hello everybody. We're using a system that we actually use with our undergraduates here, and you might have already managed to grab this link here on the left hand side because it's in the chat. But if you haven't, then please, if you've got a mobile phone near you, then scan the QR code here and see if you can join the session so that when I open some of these questions, hopefully you'll be able to put your votes in and we can see what's going on. So I'm going to open the first question anyway, because you can just keep joining at any point actually, because we'll use this a few times and you can drop in and out and answer what you fancy. So if I open our first question here, I have to put these guys out of the way. So first question to find out a little bit about what experience you've got already. So please select any that apply. How have you used open data sets in the past? So have you downloaded somebody else's open database and used it, or have you curated some of your own data and released it openly online? Just get a bit of a sense of whether we're talking to experts here.
Ahmed's got a question.
Yeah.
I actually want to hear your opinion about what you mean by open, because that's a term that is sometimes, misunderstood.
Okay, so it'd be interesting to know actually maybe whether how people are answering it, what they've instinctively put. So I suppose my immediate meaning would be one that's immediately available. So one where you're not having to request access, but one where you can go and download the data straight away. But of course, there are various levels and various ways that you could put things out there, or you could have a description of the data set and then people could request access. So, but I suppose it's that completely open that I was thinking of when I wrote it. So let's find out.
Yes, it's interesting. I guess from our funders' point of view, then the data must be accessible to those who request it. It doesn't mean it necessarily has to be completely open, but we shouldn't be putting barriers in the way of people being able to access that. And sometimes with larger data sets, certainly there might be a request stage that comes in just simply because for example, where the data is stored, needs some way of being able to transfer that across. So yes, I'll be interested to see what other people think about that as well.
Yeah, so we've got almost everybody has downloads and uses somebody else's. So that's good. We're all doing it, and then over half of the people here have put something up themselves. So that's great actually, because some of our questions later are around how we should be doing this. So we're talking to a nice experienced audience on that front. Let's have a look to the next one. So with this one, we're trying to get a little bit at how early on in your research process do you start thinking about open data sets, or have you used them in the past? So would you actually, right at the beginning when scoping a grant proposal, go and look what's out there and integrate what's out there straight away into your very earliest plans? Or is it something that maybe you've done more alongside a literature review to think what's out there and what can we use, but it's not necessarily integrated right from the beginning? Is it something that you kind of chuck to a student and say, you know, have a look at this, it'll help you with your training? Or actually, have I missed something there? So this is not an exhaustive list, but I was kind of brainstorming out of interest. How early do we engage with these things, and how well integrated are they? Got an extra person that's managed to join this one. Oh no, they've gone again. Normally when I'm using the system with the undergraduate students, when a hard question pops up, suddenly the top number the denominator will go down a lot. Okay, let's see. Maybe that's who we're going to get for this one. Okay. Okay, so actually the student training for students is a bit of a standout winner there, which actually is very much something that I've used these data sets for. So I think that's really good low-hanging fruit. I'd be really interested to hear from some of the people that have integrated right from the beginning. I think that's brilliant. I'm not sure that that's something that we've really. What do you think, Ruth? Do you think we've done that much?
I suppose with some of the OAI database, for example.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Then because we've kind of known it's been there for a number of years, then I guess that has become part of some of our proposals, that we're going to use that data set, possibly less so with some of the so image data sets, I guess we have, but perhaps not with some of the more bespoke things so much.
Is there anyone who ticked other that would like to verbalize what those others were? I'm interested. I can't see the chat, by the way, so if anyone wants to put things in the chat, but you guys will have to. Oh, I think we've got a Nico.
Yeah. So hello. Yeah. So I ticked also other because what we typically do is, for example, we use autoload a lot. So it's a loading, a loading data set. So when we use finite element models or musculoskeletal models, we compare or use the data. So I thought it didn't fit in the first three. So it's really an additional data set that we use next to our modeling models.
Yes.
And is that for validation then, Nico, or just to sort of say, okay, well, this is what
sometimes
we got.
Yeah, but it's also inputs for our models to see how large the variability is between loads, and then we apply it on the finite element models and look at the effects on micromotions or whatever. Yeah, and of course we're not gonna measure those ourselves. We use the data set.
Yeah, but that kind of, I think we've used the orthoload data before as well in maybe a similar way, where we want to check a workflow, and it's quite useful data for that because it's really comprehensive. So actually we can recreate some of the stuff that they've done and then double check it. It can be really useful for that. Okay, shall I pop on to the next one? Okay, so there's a big long list in this one. But this is kind of going to be helpful for us going to the second bit of this talk, where we'll talk you through what we've got in our data set, because I'm interested to know what you're thirsty for in terms of types of data. Now, it may well be that I haven't covered everything, and you can see there's a bit of a skew here towards computational work, because experimental is one enormous bucket, and then there's lots of more granular options here in terms of imaging and the kind of thing that you use for modeling. So there's definitely a bias, and I put my hand up to that. Okay, I'll stop it there and see what we've got. So there is a lot of people, and a lot of people would like experimental measurements, but then I've made it a very big bucket, so it may be that there's more specifics there. Equally big demand for medical imaging. So that's good news for the next bit of this talk. And then if I scroll down past those two very high demand one, also joint forces and motions coming up really high there. And segment, I mean, I would love it if somebody would do all of my segmentation for me and put it online, so I'm surprised that that one isn't higher. But quite the spread over there, actually. That's great. So either perhaps that experimental bucket where I've really just not differentiated at all, or maybe those handful of people who've ticked the other box there. Are there any further comments either in the chat or out loud that you'd like to make? Ahmed?
I mean, I checked the other box, but I think, the experimental measures can be graded too, like, tissue level measurements versus etc., like both from an input and validation perspective. But I think the reason I checked other was, I think, like more like capturing the health status of the knee or the trajectory of the knee or trajectory of the patient or the outcomes data, because eventually I think in the downstream, that's what we are trying to impact. So, and without knowing those, then even when we build and run our analysis, we may not have that correlation.
Because I'm sharing the screen, Ruth, I don't know if you can see who's got hands up or anything better than I can.
Yes, it's Jason. Sorry, I can't quite see the whole name.
Yeah, I did have my hand up. I'm just wondering, I put other also, and where the delineation between things like the metadata or being able to translate. A lot of times this data is in formats we don't necessarily understand right away, and having translators to common formats, like where does data start and stop, and where does us actually being able to use it? So that's maybe a question or a comment why I would put other.
Yeah, I think that one's going to come back as well, actually. Right. Let's skip back to the slides then. Apologies, trying to juggle. Actually, we could just go back here and then I can move it on. There we go.
Great. Thanks, Al. The QR code sitting in the next couple of slides as well. So if you haven't had a chance to catch it yet, then it's still there for in large for you to be able to hopefully get onto your phones. So we're going to focus a little bit now in more detail on one of our programs of work where we generated quite a lot of data, and that was an EPSRC grant, so our government funding. It's called a program grant, so these are their kind of large scale grants. It ran from 2016 to 2022. The aim of the program overall was to develop tools to evaluate and optimize early stage interventions for the knee across the variation in knee function seen in the patient population. So the types of this is really looking at treatments, and the types of treatments that we were focusing on were treatments of the cartilage, so things like osteochondral scaffolds and hydrogel repairs of sort of early stage cartilage lesions, so before we get to the stage where there needs to be a total knee replacement. And then more recently, we've also been focusing on meniscus repair and replacements as well. So really our focus is on the articulating surfaces and the tissues associated with those throughout this grant. If we just go on to the next slide, Al.
All right. There we go.
And our kind of overall vision, sort of long-term aim with this work, the work was really around developing the methods, but the long-term aim was that we could better stratify these kinds of new and emerging treatments that are coming out for a patient population, recognizing you're never going to get exactly a patient-specific match of material properties and everything else with, for example, the osteochondral scaffold shown on the right there. But if we can understand kind of how close a match we need, then we can start to match up the patients with the treatments better. So as I said, the program really focused on developing the underpinning methods for this. So next slide, Al. On the experiment, and it was a combined sort of experimental and computational approach that we went through. So on the experimental side, we really went from an approach where we were just testing bits of cartilage and bone in isolation, through to, by the end of the grant, being able to test in our labs in a kind of simulator type way, whole cadaveric knee joints under 6 degrees of freedom loading, and then take measurements of the things that we were interested in for these types of treatments. So things like contact pressure and distribution across the cartilage, for example, as shown there. And if it goes to the next one, Al. And then alongside that, we built computational models of these specimens by doing that, by imaging the specimens prior to testing them with both MRI and CT, and then building image-based patient subject-specific models of each of the cadaveric knees that we test in the lab. And that then enabled us to do a kind of one-to-one correspondence between the outputs from our FE model and the outputs of the experiment, to enable us to do that kind of validation piece, and also to see exactly how much variation then we then get from one specimen to another. And then the next one, Al. So across this, then we started to build up a database of models representing different knee anatomies, so that we could start to look at how these treatments might vary across the variations in anatomy that we see in a patient population. And then final bit, Al. And I guess the process that's still ongoing now is to use these tools to iteratively test and refine some of these new types of treatments and interventions. So in particular, we're still focusing at the moment on osteochondral scaffolds and other treatments for the kind of the cartilage itself, and then on meniscus replacement and repair techniques. So if we go on again, Al.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Maybe can I just say before I knew there was one more thing I meant to say. Sorry. I guess just to emphasise that I suppose because we're focusing here on the cartilage and the meniscus, our models generally do not include any ligamentous tissues. So we take their behaviour into account in the way in which we model the loads and the boundary conditions. So I guess this makes these models a little bit different to some of the other kind of open knee models that are out there, in that we don't have the ligamentous structures in these models, and that's just worth bearing in mind. That our focus was really on those treatments, as I said. Sorry, Al, carry on.
That's okay. Sorry about the lag. I keep pressing them, it takes ages to change the screen. Okay, so what I want to do now is talk you through really pragmatically what is in the data set that we currently have out there, open access. And pulling in what Amit said earlier, it's truly open access. You can go click on the link and you can go and get it right now, and start downloading things if you wanted to. In the project that Ruth described, outlined there, was a really big program grant with a lot of different sub-projects in it that had different aims. And these three knees come from one of those sub-projects, but the collection, so collection is what our library call it, where our library data repository. But we have a landing page on the DOI at the bottom of the screen there on the right hand side, and under that there is all of the data sets that we've produced associated with the various different papers on that program grant. So there is one place you can kind of find everything. We did something a little bit different with this study in comparison to what Ruth described previously. So the thing that we are obliged to do from the funder's perspective is, when we publish a paper, the underlying data needs to go up online so it's accessible. But this one we did the other way around. We did the work and we put the data up before we finalized what exactly we were going to get from it. So the data is more extensive than exactly what is talked about in the publication that's listed below there. So I'm going to tell you exactly what's in here, just in case any of it's of interest. We did not, I'm afraid, do wonderful detailed step-by-step model building protocols in the way that Amit's work has done, but we do have a methodology document in there that has pretty detailed bullet-pointed methodologies for all of the steps, and this is just one of the summary figures from inside that document. And just as an illustration, keep losing the thing. There we go. The subset of that's actually in the associated publication at the moment is the parts without the meniscus involved. That's actually what's in our current publication. So there's more data there than you might see covered in the publication. So in terms of what's actually included, this is, as I say, it's on our library database. It's not the most beautiful front end, so this slide might be a nicer summary than looking at some of the lists that we have on there. But there is a README file in PDF format which lists everything that we have, including some breakdowns of the sequences of the MRI images, etc. And we have photographs from the lab work, so example there on the top left, so you can actually see the specimens themselves. As I say, we have a much broader set of cadaveric data that comes from the wider project, and this is just the first three. We're intending to put a lot more out, and we'll come back to that a bit later. And so because of that, when we report individual studies, we tend to call the knees knee 1, knee 2, knee 3, knee 4, but we want you to be able to, if you want to, connect the knee data across multiple studies. So this specimen codes document at the bottom, it does that to make sure that if you want to pick up multiple knees across different studies, you can connect everything together. There's the methods document that we mentioned. This study is focused on looking at the contact pressure in the meniscectomy and with the meniscus. So we have contact pressure data from the experimental work and also from the computational work, as well as the computational force data and tibial movement data from our models. We've also got the finite element models are an IMP format, so they're just orphan meshes and all of the modeling data. There are micro CT scans of all of these knees, so they're high resolution, done in the basement of our building. So they're 82 microns isotropic. So there's lots of structural detail in there. I wouldn't recommend trying to download any of those unless you definitely want them, because they're quite big, so it takes a while. Because of that, we've created little preview images and lots of descriptions to make sure that you can have a little look, and it's definitely got what you're interested in before you start to do some enormous download of all the DICOM files. The MRI images are much more lightweight, much more easier to just grab and take a look at, but we've also put preview slices up of those to give you a sense of what's in there. So in terms of the finite element models, as Ruth mentioned, these don't have the ligaments on the outside. The structures that are in there and segmented and meshed are the bones, the cartilage, and both meniscus structures, which are three-dimensional, and the roots and attachments are represented as springs. So those are the main components that are in there. And of course, the IMP file contains all of the material definitions and boundary conditions and loads, but then you can go in and change those if you want to do different things with these models. Mentioned earlier, so this links nicely to a point that I think Jason brought up around, metadata about the subjects and about the condition of the tissue. So in the actual data set, this is the information that we have about the donors. So again, you can connect who's who through to the all of the information we have, obviously right or left, which if you know what you're doing, you can probably figure out anyway. Sex, age, and BMI. And we have some notes that we've taken from our observations around, and from some of the information we were given about the condition of the tissue. Not actually directly in the data set, but in our paper, we've looked at the condition of the cartilage. So we've got some cartilage thickness maps, and you can see some more detail of the condition of that cartilage and some of the degeneration. So that helps to understand some of the outcomes there. Hopefully we've got some MR fans in the house, because there's a lot of MR imaging available in this data set. We actually in this one have 7 different sequences. So from our perspective, this was done because we were triaging these knees to lots of different projects. We wanted to have a look inside while the knee was still intact, and to understand, well, one of the things we needed to check was we couldn't load up these knees in our simulator if the bone was really poor quality. We had some early ones that we tried to put under the full load, and they just cracked. And so we could look at the bone quality on the MR, and that helped us to triage the knees out to different people and different projects. But this also means that we've got this database of different MR scans, and it's the same 3 knees in all of the scans, which means that if you are interested in MR generally, this might be a good resource, or if you just want to know what you can and can't see in different sequences, then this might be a good resource to help you to understand what sequence could be useful to you, even if you're not an expert on MR, is what we were hoping. So the one that we used to build the models was the 3-dimensional double echo steady state sequence, because that had the best resolution, and we could see the meniscus as the best in that one overall. There are a few more, as I say, there's 7 overall, but for these final 3 sequences, they weren't done for 3 knees. So they're also available, but it's not as complete a data set. So I guess coming back to another theme that was mentioned earlier in that case is data formats and metadata. Having heard a bit, I guess, about what we've got there and seen some of those formats and maybe what we've included and what we've not included there, I'm interested to know what data formats and metadata you would like. So I've reopened the poll here. A few people have maybe dropped off the app, but we've got 7 people who are still in there. So thinking about finite element modeling data, what data should we be providing? So I'm very conscious that we can be quite abacus centric here. So I've tried to describe these things in not just in abacus terms, but we've provided the top one there. But are anything else useful?
And while we are waiting, maybe I can ask a question, Alison. What is the licensing? How did you distribute that? What type of licensing did you use?
That's a very good question. And off the top of my head, I can't remember. I remember the essence is that we want to be acknowledged, but you can use it for whatever you want is the baseline. But I can look up the actual name of the license.
Yeah,
it's
but
in that README file.
but there is a license, which is actually good, because in most of cases we tend to not include a license file, and then people don't know how they can use it, when they can use it, and redistribute it. Thank you.
Yeah, our library is quite good at giving us, so they have a template for the README file, which includes options on that front. So they kind of nudge us to at least make a choice, even if we're sure. Okay. Interesting. So yeah, so the IMP file seems to be a bare minimum. Everyone wants that one. We go back and forth with the software specific project file, because it obviously gives you more stuff, but it locks you down to a particular software. And the ODB not so popular. Like, the assumption being, I guess you can rerun it, and then we also are a little bit reluctant because they're so big as well to fight them into the database. I wonder if there's anyone willing to, either in the chat or out loud, say what the other is there. It's quite a big chunk of other.
We don't need to be shy, folks. I think, Alison, you mentioned about locking in. I think that's probably the resistance maybe to use software-specific formats.
Yeah, I guess just to come in, I mean, I guess we do recognise that the IMP file is obviously an abacus thing, but it is a text file, so it's pretty easy to grab out, node coordinates and so on, and put them into other formats if necessary. Whereas the CAE file is, I don't know, as far as I'm aware, it's fairly abacus specific, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's quite encouraging, because that's what we've always thought. The IMP file is probably the most useful one, but you do lose the underlying geometry. So that's one of the things that's a bit of it. If you wanted to, you then can't do much with the mesh. You're stuck with the mesh you've got, which that's
Well, I just wanted to add a small comment here. Hello first. It's Amir. I'm currently at Stanford. Well, just about previous question about the abacus. So the input file, I just wanted to add that you can export the STL files from the input file directly in the abacus. But the second thing about the ODB file was that usually when you rerun the input file, you're not able to run it, because depending on which version you use and converges settings. So that's why I think ODBs also could help, because we can directly export some of the outputs from the model. So yeah, thank you.
So were you pro ODB there then?
Well, yes, essentially, if, for example, you want to get some contact pressure or other things from the model, so we get it from the ODB. And from the input, you can extract the STLs or convert the mesh to FEBio or some other software.
That's an interesting point, Amir, actually, because that's results dissemination. And I think we tackled it by, still giving software specific, but this time FEBio files. Yeah, there is the disadvantage of a software login, but then you're disseminating the results because it is very likely that your model will not run in the next version. So,
Exactly.
but we also have in the chat box a comments too. Like, Francis, do you want to say hi and tell why you will prefer STL VTK, if you can?
Hello. So I'm not really a biologian, but I do data management, and so we prefer standardized file formats. Yeah. So the INP, yeah, I mean it's really good, but it's not really standardized. So for us, we prefer .stl files to be more standardized.
Yeah. So, but I suppose
Because
that
at the end of the day, we want our data to be fair. Yeah. So yeah, so yeah, there are certain file formats in different types of data that we want to actually get. So for me, I would prefer .stl, .vtu files, something of the sort.
yeah, which gives you, I suppose, the implication there is that the thing you really want is the geometry. So because if you're getting a software specific file or an IMP file, you're getting geometries, meshes, material property settings, boundary conditions, loads, you're getting the whole shebang. But in an STL, you're just getting that geometry, probably, as you say, in a much more flexible and adaptable format that you're not getting everything that you can basically plug straight in. Yeah.
Well noted.
Okay. Yeah, so this relates nicely to this one actually, which is obviously a kind of maybe a slightly more straightforward, but what would you that segmentation is so valuable, I think, in terms of it's so much work that if we can share that stuff, that would be really good. Okay, interesting. Again, software specific, not coming up too high. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment about that. I think personally I would prefer to have both the image, the original images and the segmentation, so I could confirm if that makes sense. Instead of,
so
one or
maybe it
the
should
other.
be, I would rather do my own checking
Right.
of your segmentation, yeah. Which is fair enough. Interesting, there's no other on this one. This I managed, I did it. I got all the options in.
Well, actually, I missed this one. Sorry, I was on the other side. If I can add, if you could provide the labels in, for example, Nifty format or other things, so people can easily extract the segmented geometries and STL files, would be valuable. And that will be in the coordinate system as the DICOM, so then they can do whatever post-processing on that data as well.
Okay, that's interesting. Could you put the name of that in the chat? I can't see the chat at the moment. That would be brilliant, because actually, we really are going to do some of this stuff. So we really are giving us instructions. That's great.
To clarify, that was basically a segmented image stack. But is that right? So basically binary images of
yes
after segmentation. Right? Yeah. That would be easy enough to do that.
So I've put TIFF format there, but of course it could be any image format. Do we have one more in this bit? Okay, so we had all those MR images there. Neither me or Ruth are a super MR image expert, but we do have a resident brilliant MR expert, and we are in the process of curating like a much bigger set of these knees. So if anybody would be interested in those MR sequences, or indeed any other sequences, because we've done a whole load of MR across now 32 of these cadaveric knees, and we are looking at what to put out there. So if you have any other comments here, I mean, even if after I close this and you think of something, you want to pop it in the chat, then we're definitely keen to hear that. Anything that you would like, anything that you are always annoyed that you never have when you try to get this data, you know, additional sequence information, whatever it is. So maybe I'll stop that one. We'll go back to have a little look at the next thing. Oh, we've got one. And you could grab the rest of them from the chat. Yeah, let's have a look at those four, and then, oh. Okay. Sorry to cut you short. If you were halfway through writing, please do put it in the chat. Oh, okay. Soft tissue segmentation.
It's all about the ligaments now.
Oh yeah. That's okay. So we'll have to have a look and see which one of those. We can ask our local expert Nagitha which one of our sequences is best for ligaments. So actually that's really useful, because we could use that to filter which of those sequences to prioritize to get up there, if ligament segmentation is the thing that people want.
I guess it's worth saying, just on a few of the knees that were going for a separate project around ligament reconstruction, then we did scan at kind of specific angles to try and get some attachment sites, but that was only quite a small number. The other ones are all scanned in a kind of along the axis effectively, which, you know, because we weren't that interested in the attachment sites. Then there's some work we've done on the hip, for example, that getting the axis is quite important if there's only a couple of slices where you're going to see some of these attachments. So they won't be ideal for ligament or ligamentous attachment sites, but we can certainly explore which sequences would be most useful to release for that.
Brilliant. So this is relatively short little bit, asking quite a simple question about that bigger set. So we have 32 knees that have been through our labs, that we have MR imaged, CT imaged, done various different mechanical tests on, built computational models from chopped into bits and tested bits of the bone, bits of the tissue, done whole joint tests on all kinds of things. But the challenge is that not all of the knees had all of the different tests done on them, or all of the models built. And we've got a pretty complete MR and CT database of these knees, but it isn't absolutely one-to-one. And so the question here is, how should we organize a database that's like that? So here are your three options. Option number one, do we organize it per knee? So we have a section of our data set for each one of the knees, and in there's everything for that knee. So the MR imaging, any experimental tests, any computational models that are associated with each one of those individual samples. So that's option number one. Do we organize it by data type? So we have an MRI area, a CT area, an FE modeling area, and then different types of experimental data. Or third option, do we organize by study? So that's what we did with the tissue. So the headline on each section would be an experimental or a research question, and then we gather the data and the knees under the research question. Snedal, you had your hand up, I think.
I think any of those would work if they're searchable. And you know, often I don't want to download a whole big data set, right? So if I could download components of it, it probably wouldn't matter how they're organized as long as we know what they are, where they're coming from.
So the system that we're working with is not that snazzy. So this choice is going to make a difference with the system that we're on. Yes, I take your point. If you could build a wonderful searchable database, but I think this is going to make a difference on our. I mean, so if you click through to the way that our library repository is organized at the moment, it doesn't have nice search boxes on it. So at least the first iteration of this, this is going to make a bit of a difference.
Francis, do you have a question? A comment?
Sorry, no, a comment. I think it would be best to organize it by the second method, which is by data type. Although the best approach would have been to, integrate this data semantically so that we're able to, search through it. So basically, what I would recommend is creating a knowledge graph of all this data and then being able to share some endpoints that somebody could be able to search through the whole thing. So I mean, the same way the first person said, they want to be able to search it. And so, biomedical data is usually very heterogeneous in nature. And so the way we manage it is by doing semantic integration. So the second method would actually be the best by data type.
So if I just repeat that back to you, you think second method by data type, but then if I understand correctly, you mean that we need some good documentation at the top that tells you what there is in each part so that you can do that cross-referencing even if we don't have an actual searchable database. Is that
is vaguely correct, but yes, you need to integrate this data at the semantic level. So you need to create a knowledge graph. So because this data is of different types, so we have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. So
okay.
What you do to integrate all of them is to introduce a semantic level to it. And so what I would recommend is I mean, this is basic knowledge representation. And for this, we usually use project-based ontologies. But once we add the individuals, which is the precise data points, then we create a knowledge graph of all of our data. So I would recommend creating a knowledge graph of all of your data, and thus it would be semantically integrated.
Do you, by any chance, have an example or a link of what you're talking about that I could look at? Because I'm not familiar with semantic integration and knowledge graphs, but it sounds very encouraging and like a good idea, but it would be good to follow up.
Yes, I think we could follow up. Sorry, I think we could follow up after this because at University of Pompeu Fabra at UPF, so we have several different thematic areas. We are working on the spine, we are working on the intervertebral disc, we are working on vascular, we are working on the body in general. So we have various different thematic areas which all have very different heterogeneous types of data. And so the best way which we are able to give our users a way to be able to explore this data is by exploring the semantics. So what we did is we created 4 different knowledge graphs. And then we integrated them together. And then now through the SparkQL endpoints which we provide, the users are able to search through all this data. I think we could do a follow-up after this. I apologize.
No, I was actually thinking that maybe you folks need to give a presentation in this webinar series.
Yeah, definitely.
I wish we would be able to get a chance to give a presentation. That would really be awesome.
Okay.
I'm going to drop out because when I'm presenting on my screen, I can't see anybody.
Yeah.
And it's really
Perfect.
frustrating.
No.
I feel like I'm back. Okay.
So we
Yeah,
have
so
a hand
we
raised,
had
yeah.
one more quick question there about metadata, but actually, I guess we are sort of, at least with this database, stuck with the metadata that we know. We only know what we know, and we'll put all of that out in terms of the subjects. But that has been really useful for me. And the big winner was by data type, so we're going to take that back. That's super useful.
I think there's one more hand up. Sorry, Tor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, can you see me? Yeah, so I suppose I would also potentially suggest maybe why not both would be the obvious question someone would ask. And I realize that there's probably some impracticality in providing the data set in both formats, but what you might do is choose the full data set by data type and then pick maybe one or two knees that are the most comprehensive and supply them sort of top down, right? That way, by data type, you might also give some opportunities for people who wanted to do, not just computational modeling, but maybe machine learning, where they're looking for a very specific type of data, and they're potentially going to pull it together with 100 other data sets they find of some MR. But at the same point, someone might want to build, the most comprehensive knee model ever, and having all of the data that possibly exists for one knee would be helpful. So you might also consider doing by data for the full set, but then picking the ones that are the most complete and maybe providing one or two of those sort of top down, if you will.
Yeah, and actually, right off the top of my head, I think we do have a couple of knees that fall in that category that came in quite early, were quite high quality bone, and ended up getting reused for a lot of things. So I think that could work really nicely. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea and practical that we could do. We could definitely do that, couldn't we? Right.
Although, just to counter that a little bit, because the way we model knowledge, what we do is we split it down into different concepts. So basically, there would be a repetition if we have to do it by data set. So what we want to do is to model the whole domain at once, to be able to, to find the ultimate data set. So for instance, if we have 2 different data sets or 5 different data sets, it doesn't matter what concept is in each of these data sets, because at the end of the day, we are going to have some type of repetition. So I mean, I'm just trying to contribute to it, but yeah, that was a really good contribution.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody who's put things in the chat as well around formats and sequences. That's great. Thank you.
All right, since we are at the top of the hour, are there any more questions? I'll take that as a no. And thank you both so much for this. This was a fantastic discussion, and we hope to continue these. And thank you everybody for joining, and we will see you all next month.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to copy things out of the chat on the way out.
Thank you.